Okay, get started now. I'm Paul Pearson. I'm the director of the Berkeley Economy and Society Initiative, and delighted to welcome you to our talk today. I often in talks like this, people say the person needs no introduction, and then they proceed with a long introduction. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say the person needs no introduction. Marion needs no introduction beyond saying she's one of the greatest economic sociologists in the world, and we're very happy to have her here to talk about her new book. And I thought I would just start. I was reading the Ordinal Society simultaneously with reading Jennifer Egan's The Candy House, and was shocked to see all the overlap. And thought I would start with a short passage from that, which I think sets up Marion's discussion well. And in it, two characters are talking about how their father's music producing business is falling apart as Napster emerges. And she writes, "In frantic league, we flailed for ways to end the sharing that was dismantling our father's business and our father. We contemplated a nationwide billboard campaign to remind people of that eternal law: nothing is free. Only children expect otherwise, even as myths and fairy tales warn us. Rumpelstiltskin, King Midas, Hansel and Gretel. Never trust a candy house. It was only a matter of time before someone made them pay for what they thought they were getting for free. Why could nobody see this?" Well, Marion saw it and Kieran saw it, and she's going to tell us about it.
Thank you so much, Paul. Oh, that's the one I need to use. Thank you so much, Paul. And I want that quote. This is so great, especially since Napster is one of our examples in the book. All right, so my deepest thanks to Paul and to BESI for organizing this event. And of course, to all of you for coming. I see a lot of friendly faces, sometimes coming from like the past. So the rise of big data combined with computer algorithms has transformed nearly every major institution. Mathematical optimization techniques are now commonly used to control workers, handle financial transactions, manage communications, predict risks, distribute resources, and guide decisions. These changes have fundamentally reshaped how markets function, how governments operate, and how society itself is organized. So much so that it may be worth characterizing these processes as a new principle of social order. My co-author Kieran Healy and I call this new social formation the Ordinal Society. The Ordinal Society is a world where computer code ranks, sorts, and optimizes nearly every aspect of our lives. The Ordinal Society, the book, is perhaps a bit unusual, a bit old-fashioned. Although it is based on Kieran's and my long-term engagement with empirical case studies, it is not a monograph. It is not like a deep dive into one particular domain. Rather, it proposes a way of thinking about the existing and likely consequences of the digitization of all social relations. So it's a bit difficult to present the whole book. So what I decided to do instead is to focus on the political economy of the Ordinal Society, since this is what BESI is all about. How it arises, how it sustains itself, and what its consequences might be. So these are the chapters, the chapter on the gift that Paul mentioned, and then the two, the chapter on the economy and the chapter on finance. So how I'm going to talk about how the Ordinal Society arises, how it sustains itself, and what the consequences might be. But before I start digging into this specific subject, let me briefly explain the book's title, The Ordinal Society. Why this term? Well, there are two reasons. First, ordinal or ordinality evokes the idea of order, and in particular, an order brought about by computers. To understand why this is the case, let me tell you a story from my home country, France. In French, the word computer is translated by ordinateur. We owe this term, this neologism actually, to a professor of Latin at the Sorbonne whom IBM France consulted at the time of the release of the first commercial machine, the IBM 650. The proposal was to call the machine the calculateur, which is the literal French translation of computer, machine that computes. But the professor, Jacques Perret, objected. "Dear sir," he wrote, "how about ordinateur? It is a correctly formed word, which is even found in Littre's dictionary as an adjective designating God who brings order to the world." But he said theological usage is infrequent now, and the crisis of faith has struck all of us. So it would be fine to call your machine ordinateur. And then he continued, "Rereading the brochures you gave me, I see that several of your devices are designated by female agent names. Trieuse, tabulatrice, ordinatrice would be perfectly possible and would even have the advantage of further separating your machine from the vocabulary of theology. My preference would be to go for l'ordinatrice électronique." And of course, the female reference was not an accident. As I think is very well known, behind the mechanical facade, it was women who supplied the bulk of the labor by which information was harvested and processed in a quasi-industrial manner. In fact, before the invention of the computing machine, the term computer referenced an office clerk, usually a woman, performing calculations by hand. So the computer, the ordinatrice électronique, is an electronic machine for ordering the world, for sorting through it and putting it in order. In that way, it descends from earlier revolutionary control innovations like double-entry bookkeeping in 15th century Italy or the Brooks letter file cabinet. But of course, the term ordinal or ordinality has a more precise meaning too. Ordinal numbers, as opposed to cardinal numbers, which capture quantity, are numbers that show position or rank in a sequence. So again, we are back to this idea of an ordering mechanism that is effected through numbers. So in our view, an ordinal society is one that reformats social life in all of its forms by continuously ingesting digital measurements and spitting out scores and ranks by way of computing machines. These ordinal processes are the basic infrastructure through which the distribution of opportunities and the allocation of goods now takes place. An ordinal society classifies, sorts, and slots everyone who comes under its purview. It creates order, what sociologists conventionally call social structure, by representing the flow of social life as streams of data, by categorizing people, and by matching them to each other and to social positions. We now see these processes everywhere. We see them at home and at work. We see them in our schools and in our cars. Here are a few examples. Student tracking secret scores, tenant scores, your rider score on Uber or Lyft. So they're essentially everywhere. And we've become sort of very accustomed to them. Of course, the question is how new this ordinal society really is. And in some important ways, not that much. In fact, the striving that animates it has a long history. In the 19th century American credit market, for instance, business guides started developing methods to identify good credit prospects. As the historian Josh Lauer describes, credit men went around town collecting various bits of information, gossip really, about the economic reliability of individuals and corporations. Around the country, dedicated organizations started compiling and circulating local lists of businesses or individuals to subscribers. The credit guide provided addresses and occupations along with numerically or pictographically coded information about people's qualities as potential debtors. So for instance, I couldn't find a Fourcade, in the credit guide, but we were able to find a bunch of Healys. Healy's is an Irish name. So anyway, and you can see a bunch of Healys here being coded. We can also look at life insurance. The emergence of life insurance follows a similar path, a story told by historian Dan Book. As head of New York's largest life insurance company in the 1920s, the composer Charles Ives made it his business to turn life insurance scoring into an objective, scientific, according to him, operation. Here's an image, in fact, of Charles Ives' own medical record documenting his weight change as he is battling diabetes. And of course, capitalism was flourishing and labor had to be rationalized too. Matteo Pasquinelli, in a recent book, reminds us that industrial machines were understood early on not only as instruments of production, but also as instruments for the measurement and optimization of labor. In fact, Charles Babbage, who invented the ancestor of the computer, the differential engine, was obsessed with task division, skill categorization, and worker surveillance. And that's his difference engine here. And then, of course, finally, the post-war period saw the consolidation of consumer profiles. In a visionary book from the early 1990s, Oscar Gandy Jr. discusses the rapidly expanding depth and breadth of consumer records. One of the key shifts was actually the sudden proliferation of transactional data mined from credit card payments. In the 1980s, the American Express company started digitizing customers' sales receipts. The new records, it claimed in an ad from 1982, were full of valuable, detailed insight. And the ad said, our product is information that charges airline tickets, hotel rooms, dining out, the newest fashions, and even figures mailing costs for a travel magazine, information that grows money funds, buys and sells equities, and manages mergers, information that pays life insurance annuities, figures pricing for collision coverage, and creates and pays mortgages, information that schedules entertainment on cable television and electronically guards houses. All of this, could be mined from, the receipts, the physical receipts, which at the time, were not electronic naturally, they had to be scanned. So in other words, knowing what people buy, where, and how had the potential to transform every business. Soon, payment records would be stored in digital form and circulated much more easily. So now that I sort of have set the stage historically, let me try to move to the present. Today, collecting data in digital form has become a cultural obligation for most organizations, what Kieran Healy and I call the data imperative. Falling costs of storage, software, and cloud computing, as well as weak consent laws, especially in the US, have pushed organizations of all types to sweep up increasingly large quantities of bits about whatever crosses their path. For a few $1,000s, any organization with an online presence can deploy a sensory dragnet that collects granular data about people and things. Consultants and tech solutionists disseminate the normative belief that data and computation necessarily results in actionable knowledge. What kind of knowledge, for what purpose, may actually not be known. The history of computation is full of examples showing that future uses are often unrelated to the reasons why the data was logged in the first place. But since new computing techniques have the ability to discover patterns with virtually no pre-established conception about the world, organizations today, both public and private, are compelled to seek and demand as much data as possible and as varied data as possible. And the justification is that these can be mined in a somewhat agnostic fashion to find relations that stick. Now, in practice, the new methods are associated with all kinds of problems which are well known: spurious correlations, opaque decision rules, discriminatory outcomes, you name them, right? So why do we still buy into them? To answer that question, I think it is essential to return to the data imperative, not as a demand-side mechanism, but as a supply-side mechanism too. In fact, in the process of insuring themselves against risk, or applying for a loan or a job, or benefiting from some special deal, people have learned to subject themselves to intrusive questioning about their identity, their lifestyle, their finances, sometimes their ancestry and their health. Just as organizations are culturally obligated to collect more and more data, people find it both compelling and necessary to produce more and more data about themselves. Their life chances today might depend in part on an automatic evaluation of personality and job suitability generated from an AI-run video interview, actually, that lives forever on a digital scorecard. Now, of course, some of this incorporation is coerced, as in this example of like you're forced to take like a, an AI-run interview, but a lot of it is not. A lot of it is much more open and much more cheerful. This is what Paul was talking about, right? General purpose apps such as Gmail or Facebook or Instagram, and more recently ChatGPT, initially came to us as generous gifts. They were freely extended by, at the time, hopeful startups, and for the most part, enthusiastically embraced by the public. I remember what it meant to be like a beta tester. I think a lot of you remember, right? When I got Gmail as a beta tester, I was so excited. Now, of course, any anthropologist worth their dime will immediately tell you that gifts are never really free. Being given something usually means being drawn into an expectation of exchange. Tech platforms gave people useful, often wonderful tools, and in return, they got to peer into the flow of ongoing creative social existence, which was now remained as valuable data. And to show you that, the book, this is not in the book, but I thought I would actually pepper a little bit, add a few interviews that I did. So one interview I conducted in 2017 with the CEO of a business networking app, which I have anonymized here as EagleNet, candidly captures the essence of the tech economy business model. For them, success is all about scaling up from an initial freebie using the natural dynamics of sociality, reciprocity, and self-interest. So let me read the quote. The big picture is that our goal at EagleNet is to have tens of millions of business professionals using the EagleNet platform for free, or some form of free, providing the data. And then we go and sell that data and those insights to our enterprise customers. That's our business model. Another example, because the point is actually quite general, interviews I conducted for another project, this time about the digitization of schools during the pandemic, showed the exact same dynamic at work. So here's my example. And it's from actually a school administrator during the pandemic. And he said, one of the interesting things that I think happened at the start of COVID was there were a lot of vendors that kind of came out and said, we want to give you our product for free. And it was kind of interesting because, like, for me, it literally meant, there were dozens of apps that we didn't have before just going into clutter. So many of those apps that we got for free, we ended up buying. And indeed, here, let me give you a few examples of some of the educational tech apps that became really big during the pandemic. Anybody here who has children will probably recognize them. CISO, Nearpod, and ClassDojo, right? And if you look, sign up for free, free for teachers. So it's, the apps are usually free for initially students and teachers, but then there's a paying version for the school so that the school gets to peer into what the children are doing and what the teachers are doing. And then there's also a paying version for parents. So this is how they make their money. So in other words, educational tech platforms, like most platforms, leverage the combined power of gift exchange and social networks to scale. And I've called elsewhere this process accumulation by gift. Now, once a platform has succeeded in inserting itself into a social relation, once it has leveraged human sociality to generate a constant flow of data, how does it make money? So in the next section of this talk, I dive into this question by making 2 points. The first point that we argue in the book is that economic competition sustained by computation and abundant information is actually qualitatively distinct from antecedent forms. And the second point is that we argue that digitization has a natural affinity with financialization. So let me go into these two questions. So what does competition by computation look like? I wish we found that, that concept after the book, and it was like, yes, that would have been so good. But it's anyway, what does it look like? So at the macro level, the platform's first move has often been to lock in users and lock out competitors through what economist Joseph Schumpeter called monopolistic practices. This is not new, and this is, in every economist, of course, will be very familiar with this. So for instance, according to the Federal Trade Commission complaint filed against Amazon, the company abused its marketplace position by using seller data to copy successful products and promote its own brands through advertising and search results after initially attracting sellers with favorable terms that were later revoked. I mean, it's a summary of a lot of information, but that's essentially it. Earlier this year, the Justice Department won a major antitrust case against Google for leveraging its search dominance to benefit its ad business. And of course, EU regulators have similarly pursued tech companies for antitrust violations. And this is not unique to US tech. China also cracked down on anti-competitive practices during the pandemic, including on Tencent blocking Alibaba's links on WeChat, right? So, it's sort of a natural, logical, if you will, consequence of sort of the way that digital capitalism works. The tech industry, of course, has built a robust defense of these tendencies. For the most part, it frames them as Schumpeterian virtues that drive innovation. As PayPal founder Peter Thiel put it in a Wall Street Journal op-ed, competition is for losers. At the micro level, the platform's instincts has been to ordinalize. So the more a firm knows about its customers or its employees or its tenants, the more it will be tempted to use that information in its dealings with them. So rather than offering a single market price, it might make sense to make informed guesses about what different sort of people are willing to pay or receive. Now, we should note that from an economic perspective, we may still have an efficient allocation of resources. The difference is that the combination of market power and more fine-grained segmentation tools means that corporations are in a position to squeeze out far more of the surplus on both the buy side and the sell side. So, for instance, we've all had experience of roller coaster airline or hotel prices, right? Software today also increasingly helps sellers, landlords, or employers automatically set prices, rents, or wages based on an increasingly wide range of variables. And there's quite a bit of evidence that some of these products push the envelope as far as possible, as a ProPublica investigation of a rent-setting algorithm called RealPage has shown. Now, of course, whether the effects of these practices on the whole are regressive or redistributive, that's an empirical question. We don't know, right? It depends on whose data and what kind of data is being used and how. In product markets, for instance, you could imagine that a more perfectly price discriminatory world could very well benefit those of lesser mean by giving them access to the same products at lower prices. But, discrimination along some other dimension might have sharply regressive effects. So for instance, perhaps our data can help us identify a class of people who will be tempted by a particularly rotten deal, whether for reasons of poor literacy, straitened circumstance, social stigma, language barrier, or citizenship status. Now, economists and legal scholars have accumulated substantial evidence that such practices are routine and quite profitable. For instance, economists Hong Ru and Antoinette Shore have analyzed over 1 million credit card mailings. They found that less educated consumers receive low intro APRs on their credit card, but higher fees, while educated customers get higher annual fees but lower penalty charges. And of course, the people who tend to suffer the most are in groups that have a long history of being targeted by subpar services and deals. And so this is how the price discriminations ends up overlapping with more familiar forms of social discrimination. Now, of course, as a business strategy, none of these practices are new, right? But the abundance of detailed individual information really tends to obscure their operation and also to supercharge them. And of course, the point is quite general and applies across markets, including the labor market. So certainly today, data-driven workplace management certainly offers opportunities to workers who are previously excluded from labor markets. So we've seen that a lot, right? Uber as being sort of a great way in which immigrants get incorporated, right? But, these same platforms, of course, also enable tighter control over employees through digital surveillance on time, surveillance of schedules, surveillance of productivity, and so on. Okay, so again, there's nothing here that would surprise Frederick Taylor, but the new instruments are so much more potent than the stopwatch. Algorithms today can score the likelihood of someone quitting their job. They can set remunerations based on an automatically generated estimate of what a worker might be willing to accept, given their rating and the specific conditions that data suggests they face. Increasingly, of course, everybody is also expecting that others will be rated. So for instance, clients may be expecting precisely measured billable hours, tracked minute by minute by a reliable software. So we're all complicit in this, right? Now, of course, the tools are often problematic and ineffective in all sorts of ways, but that does not prevent them from being used and for the data they generate to be stored. But there is more, okay? So that was sort of competition by computation. Let me now move sort of more into the financial domain. So the unbundling and monitoring that is enabled by digital technology actually also fits beautifully with the abstracting power of finance. Any transaction, any physical property, any aspect of work or everyday activity might be unbundled and then abstracted into a flow of information about the present that can be classified, priced, and sold as a bet about the future. Okay, so here, we can think, for instance, I'll give you a few examples, but connected devices typically are at the forefront of converting real-world activities into tradable data flows. So let me give you a few examples. So when a company sells a physical but datafied good, the buyer typically owns the physical item. So you own the fridge, right? Or you own the smoke alarm, or you own the John Deere combine harvester, right? As represented in this picture. But the manufacturer retains control of the software and usage data. Some devices have built-in features that require additional payments to unlock, as if your car comes with all kinds of features that you might use, but you have to pay for them to be available. And then, of course, the manufacturer may sell the collected data to third parties or use it to market their own related services. So let me try to illustrate this with the example of a gaming console. And I took like a farming gaming console. Well, actually, that's Kieran. I had like a much more boring console, but we thought we would follow the metaphor of the tractor. Okay, so you buy the physical hardware, right? You buy the Xbox, right? You purchase the downloadable game, which is the farming game, right? And you may need an online subscription to play, right? The connected game then collects the user data, shows you ads, and might actually sell you in-game items, right? And then some games also integrate with crypto economies, allowing you to purchase digital assets like NFTs and cryptocurrencies. During the pandemic, the play-to-earn game Axie Infinity became widely popular in the Philippines. Players could earn cryptocurrency tokens by breeding, battling, and trading digital pets called Axies. So that's one way in which you have this entry into the financial, this financialization. But another way is what we call financial layering. So the digital reconfiguration of physical objects is turning them into sources of myriad and repeated transactions. That's the example of the gaming console. But if we go further, we have other kinds of layering, right? You can inscribe various kinds of financial products on top of physical but smart goods. So I'll discuss 3 examples. The layering of credit, the layering of insurance, and the layering of market intelligence. So credit. Linking a loan offering to a retail sale is an old and profitable business. Most of us have bought our car on credit, right? So it's common, and we know that in fact the financial arm of, for instance, GM is actually its most profitable. The most profitable part of its business. But with enough data on its users, customers, or employees, any company can really think of itself as a lender or facilitate lending by third parties. So we see this today in online retail, where default credit options are now enabled for even the smallest items. So you can, if you go online and buy a pair of jeans, you can get like a payday loan right there for it. Bigger credit contracts are also easier to set up and execute. With an ongoing connection to the car or the tractor enabled by default, a manufacturer effectively has a persistent link to the owner. So this can be used to monitor credit compliance and compel loan repayment. And in particular, buyers with poor credit might face compounded disadvantages. So beyond the fact that they will have higher interest rates and larger down payments, they may be required to accept what's called payment assurance devices in their purchases. These devices, as detailed in this Ford patent, combine GPS tracking with remote disabling capabilities that can shut down vehicles when payments are missed. Okay, so that's for credit. Insurance, of course, also looms large as a means of monetizing streams of data coming from smart commodities. Smart cars continuously collect driving data that companies then sell to insurers. There was a big, you may have seen the big investigation in the New York Times by Kashmir Hill. And so that data, that driving data, enables personalized dynamic insurance pricing. The premiums can be adjusted based not only on the vehicle condition and the common routes, but also on the driving behavior, like hard braking and traffic violations and using your phone while driving. In a way, of course, this has always been the goal of insurance pricing, but things change qualitatively when the information insurers need is supplied and scored directly by the car, or some obligatory telematic device rather than via a polite inquiry to the owner. So here's the Tesla safety score, which powers its insurance business and is still in beta version. So collecting and processing more behavioral data surely reduces the informational asymmetries that make insurance a risky business. But we're shifting here from socialized risk to individualized risk. And that transforms, of course, the very meaning of insurance and could even undermine the business itself. And actually, insurers are, are actually worried about, the monster that they have themselves, of course, unleashed. Finally, the financial payoffs of datafication can power a bird's eye view of the whole market, what we call here intelligence. So a smart and connected tractor fleet has value both as physical assets and as data generators. The data streams and associated contracts could even be more valuable, right? Potentially allowing a manufacturer, say John Deere, to become a financial intermediary for crop planning and sales, or perhaps to sell market intelligence about agricultural activity to commodity traders, because they have, since they dominate the tractors market, they have, through their connected devices, they will have all of this information. Now, of course, John Deere has not fully implemented such a vision, but it has highlighted some of these possibilities to investors as a future revenue stream. Earlier this year, the company partnered with Elon Musk's Starlink to enable machine connectivity in rural areas. The company intends to generate a tenth of its annual revenue stream from these kinds of software subscriptions by 2030. So, market intelligence is also something that might emerge in this way. Now, let me give you another example, because John Deere is not realized. So, let me give you a realized example of what happens when a company generates abundant and valuable market intelligence from its own customers. And the example is Robinhood. The example is that, Robinhood is an online financial brokerage firm, right? And in some ways, it is the perfect example of the whole process from the beginning to the end that we discuss in the book. It's a perfect execution of accumulation by gift. It attracted its users by offering commission-free trading, right? But of course, if you're offering commission-free trading, you have to make money somehow. So how did it make money? Well, it generated revenue by selling the right to execute trades to a powerful market maker called Citadel Securities. And that gave Citadel and other firms in the same position advanced information on order flows. And then Citadel also profits from the spread between the buy and sell prices. So what happened, 2 years ago, almost 3 years, 3 years ago now, is that there was you remember the GameStop saga? Okay. So there was a lot of excitement on social media, on Reddit, about this outmoded stock, GameStop. There was also AMC theaters and so on. So a bunch of small investors got really, really excited, and they thought they were finally going to take revenge on Wall Street. Some made money. Most were fleeced. And the market maker, did handsomely well because it benefited from the enormously high trading volume and for the extraordinary excitement that had been generated on social media. Okay, so this is why, this is because the market intelligence had been generated from the users and then sold to Robinhood, to Citadel. So I've been sort of arguing that digitally based ordinalization facilitates the entrenchment of the logic of the market and specifically financial markets. Processes that were institutionally confined originally to fairly separate domain of finance suddenly get unleashed on everything. Every good becomes what financial economists call a nexus for contract. Every producer of goods becomes a technology company. Every technology company becomes potentially a software service provider. And every useful software service can be turned into a flow of information that is measured, divided, classified, and thus abstracted. And today, by the way, this is true for every possible good. Today, you can buy academic citations in bulk, apparently, as revealed by Nature. Yeah. It's very cheap, too. Yeah. I know. So all of these practices, of course, provide a huge persuasive boost to the prospect of aggregating or rebundling these abstractions and treating them as foundations for other financial products. And of course, the process is not confined to things. We're also seeing a flourish of experiments at the intersection between personal data and finance, often using the blockchain. In one small but particularly remarkable stunt, a young Frenchman named Alex Masmej issued a personal token, the Alex, that gave investors some right to weigh on his life decisions. And then he used the proceeds to finance what else? A move to the Bay Area. A much grander design by OpenAI CEO Sam Altman invites people to store retinal scans and other personal data on the blockchain in exchange for some digital tokens, or world, which they call world coins. Over 6 million people in 120 countries, most of them in the global south, have been persuaded to sign up for it. Of course, it's highly intrusive and exploitative, and it's been controversial from the beginning, but that has not prevented a WorldCoin from receiving a lot of funding from venture capital, 250 million to date. Okay, with the usual suspects from the venture capital field. Competition, in fact, rages around the fusion of digital identities and digital currencies. One recent project, I have to say this because of the name, okay, this is so, but one recent project introduced to the Bitcoin mainnet in January 2023 inscribes additional digital information such as text, images, and other assets directly into the blockchain. And I kid you not, these instruments are called Bitcoin ordinals. Okay, so we have come full circle, right, from the ordinateur to the Bitcoin ordinal. Okay, so this, this last bit, I don't want you to pay too much attention to it. It's just the word was so, I had to say this. It's a lot of this seems very fanciful or even absurd, but on a day where like Bitcoin sort of broke the $100,000 barrier, this is we should think about this. We would be naive to simply dismiss these projects as irrelevant. But, we should sort of go back a little bit closer to the ground. Closer to the ground, things are well in train. Authenticated, accurate, consolidated data about oneself increasingly looks like a kind of personal asset, a sort of resource, In effect, we could call it a form of capital that is of more or less value to people in different settings. In the book, we call this eigencapital. Eigencapital is, is the quantitative distillation of the characteristic content of your digitally mediated life. It's a sort of, if you want to think about it, it's a sort of mix of identification and reputation for you that is portable and relevant across institutional settings. The best way to think about it practically is as a concept that captures the ease with which a person might navigate systems controlled by automated decision makers. Let me give you a few examples. In its simple forms, eigencapital might take the form of a single number or rating, like a credit score or a trustworthiness measure or an influence metric. For instance, Airbnb has patented a system that calculates their customers' trustworthiness, score using data from websites, social media, blogs, comments, and data bought from data brokers. The system screens for negative traits, including false profiles, substance abuse, sex work, hate group connections, and so on. It assigns personality scores, and it also factors in the trustworthiness of everybody that you are related to. Okay, and in some way, every large tech company wants to produce some version of this, and most companies would like to see their version institutionalized across domain. Right now, the Airbnb trustworthiness score is unlikely to be that vehicle, but there is one good candidate, which is the credit score. The credit score today is very ubiquitous. It is, it's used everywhere. It's used in employment. It's used in housing. It's used in insurance, right? And it is, some sort of condensed version of, of your financial life, and increasingly a lot of other things as well. And to show you how a credit score might be, how important a credit score might be, and how mundane, last year, an accountant from Boston added a picture of her excellent credit score to her Hinge profile. Hinge is a dating website. And in a TikTok video that went viral, she basked in the swelling wave of interest that she received from prospective dates. Okay, so, the example seems silly, right? But it is in fact deadly serious. These are the connections that people want to make. They want to sort of show this as, a way of, demonstrating their trustworthiness or their creditworthiness and so on. So I don't know, perhaps Marx had it backwards. History appears as farce first, and then as tragedy. So the dating example is just one example among many of this banalization of eigencapital. There is something quite revolutionary about this shift. New ways of measuring and verifying personal worth are replacing traditional status markers, sometimes, in fact, for the better. But there is also something deeply conservative about eigencapital, since access to the resources and opportunities needed to score well on these measures remains, of course, unequally distributed across the population. So, in domain after domain, ordinal technologies are changing the nature of economic competition, the distribution of resources, and the everyday experience of status and personal worth. And to understand this last part in depth, we might have to read the rest of the book. But I hope that I've made it interesting enough that you will want to do so. So thank you very much.